Finishes and factions catching action.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the newest episode of Finishes and Factions Goes NXT from the 29th of January in the Center Stage Arena in Atlanta, Georgia, with myself, Rich, and Adam. Oops, no?
Correction. A sold-out Center Stage.
Oh, I was going to say, I thought I'd fucked that one up in the first 30 seconds. Jesus Christ. Yep, I've been Rich. We have Adam here as well. And we are back in Atlanta with NXT for the first time in 7 years.
That is a long-ass time for Atlanta without NXT. And what a card we've got for today. This is...
It's a phenomenal card.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we're going to crack straight in because NXT this week did not start off with a promo. It did not start off with in-ring, backstage, GM office. We started with match one.
We got down to business straight away this week, which I thought was brilliant. Yeah, women's tag team match. We had Julia, the current NXT women's champion, tag teaming with Bayley, who is in her first match on NXT since 2020 against Cora Jade and Roxanne Perez.
So it's important to realise how historic stage is in Atlanta. A majority of WCW house shows filmed at Center Stage. In fact, one of the commentators for this program won his first WCW Tag Championship at Center Stage in Mr. Booker T.
Can you dig it, sucker? I got a little bit too into that. I'm pretty sure my neighbours are going to not appreciate this one too much. Yeah.
Never mind. But yeah, we started off with Julia and Bayley and Cora and Roxanne Perez. And this, I'm not going to lie, this wasn't a bad opening match, to be quite honest, considering the NXT level star power we had in this. And this isn't downplaying NXT. It is still a developmental brand, but a brand all the same. This is why they don't go for the big arenas. They go for the smaller venue shows.
But they still sell out, which is a big confidence boost, unlike their TV rivals in AEW. It's nice to have a full crowd in the background.
Oh, 100%. And now that NXT and TNA have a multi-year talent sharing deal, it's a case that we're not just going to be treated to NXT talent, it's going to be TNA talent as well.
Oh, you know what? I cannot wait for the day that Joe Hendry turns up at NXT with that title stuck on his shoulder. The pop in that arena is going to be incredible.
Oh, 100%. But
we digress again. Back to Bayley and Julia versus Cora Jade and Perez.
Yeah.
We had a few, as I said, big spots in this match as well. Like there were some big talking points. I know you pulled this one up. I didn't pull it up in my notes, but I did definitely remember that suicide dive from Perez that went into a turnbuckle attack was absolutely amazing.
Oh yeah, 100%. It is clear, and it sort of leads me on to the next point that I had in my notes. I am of a firm belief that Perez is overdue a call up to the main roster.
Well, she's not long dropped her title. I think it'll be either the Monday Night Raw after WrestleMania at the latest that we will see. Perez up on the main roster.
Well, at the minute, I think instead of doing, obviously, we've mentioned it here, there, and yawn about a transfer window. So traditionally, WWE have done a WWE draft where different superstars can be drafted to different brands. Whereas this time they've done it a little bit differently, where they've done a transfer window instead. And we've already seen some big names changing hands. I mean, Damian Priest went from Raw to SmackDown.
Along with Wyatt Six, who again went from Raw to SmackDown. The Miz, Raw to SmackDown.
Yeah. And just the night before this, we were told that Selena Vega was going to be transferring from Raw to SmackDown in quite a big move. So...
We have seen a lot of people go from Raw to SmackDown. Now, I don't know if this is them just trying to give a lot of the talent at Raw that isn't getting used at the moment an opportunity to get used. There is not a lot of talent going from SmackDown to Raw, so I think we're trying to maybe even up the shows a little bit, so SmackDown and Raw are more similar in style with their competitors. Because at the moment you've got a very obvious step in programs. It's very much Raw at the top, SmackDown at the in the middle, sorry, and NXT is several steps below SmackDown, but that's because it's a developmental show. We've mentioned that already today, and their budget it purely just isn't as big as the two main rosters, so to speak.
So what I think it's important to realise is that Raw has recently from being a 3-hour cable and is now between 2 to 3 hours on live stream, and the talent roster for was so much more bulked than it would have been ordinarily.
And we've seen every show drop down in length as well. We're getting to it. This week's NXT was only actually an hour and 15 minutes in length, but what they managed to pack into that hour and 15 minutes was substantial.
100%.
Which I think if they can drop a bit of time out of SmackDown and Raw a little bit more, and with the content that they're putting in with the promos and their actual matches, you can only better what's coming up in future. And I think you can see at the moment how WWE are experimenting with play times and timing schedules just to see what works for them. With obviously the move to Netflix.
Yeah, of course. I mean, Netflix means that they're not bound by a certain time or anything. Yeah, a lot creative.
Yeah, obviously, we're going to see Perez in the Women's Royal Rumble. That's been confirmed, isn't it, that she's taking part in the Women's Royal Rumble?
So I don't think she has declared the Women's Royal Rumble. I am just double checking. So currently, no, she hasn't declared for the Royal, but I think it is a safe bet to say that she is going to be seeing the
Royal Rumble.
Women's Royal Rumble.
Yeah. So I had here that there was a reasonable amount of it was evenly contested for a majority of the match, but I found I'm not sure if it's just me personally. Cora Jade seemed to be a bit of a weak link in this match.
So this seems to be a bit of a running thing.
With NXT, it does seem to be.
Well, I'm just thinking with Cora Jade specifically, she seems to be getting quite a bit of. She seems to be being used as filler, almost.
And like we've said in previous episodes, it's as though she's got something signed into her contract that says that she has to make a certain amount of appearances per year. And they are literally just trying to get them in just in case she suffers an injury at some point.
Yeah, it's as if she's due for some time off.
Yeah.
Time off soon or something like that.
Is Cora Jade off to have a baby and that's why she's been shoved down our throats for the last couple of months?
Possibly.
I mean, we're only speculating here. There's nothing that has been confirmed or nor denied. But say, I put in here that I didn't think it was a great match. I'm not saying it's a bad match by any stretch of the imagination. But if you do compare what you normally get from a women's tag match in the main roster, it wasn't quite up to those standards. But again, developmental company. They're still learning. They are obviously bringing in some bigger names to try and help with that. I think obviously Bayley's coming down and helping out, but that workhorse has been everywhere. And you've got Roxanne Perez as well, is very experienced, and she's kind of using a bit of that. I think they'll be using her backstage to try and help some of these smaller women that are coming up through push through before Bayley goes back to main roster and Roxanne Perez goes with it.
Yeah, and I think that's fair enough to assume. Yeah, the crowd really seemed to goes. I mean, it had Bayley in it, and Bayley is a bit of an NXT hero.
She is. She was one of the original four horsewomen, sorry, of NXT. A majority of her titles and things to start off with were all NXT titles, so she was very, very popular within the NXT brand before she went to main roster. So when she gets to go back to what I suppose to her would be a home roster more than anything, she loves it, and because she's enjoying being there, the crowd really do get to pick up on that, and it makes us as viewers definitely more interested in what's going on.
Oh yeah, definitely. It gives people like myself and Rich who aren't very to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I struggle with NXT. I've made this known from the start. It's one of the I find it the weakest show. I struggle getting into it some weeks. Some weeks have been brilliant. Some weeks have been not quite so good. But then for me, this week was one of the ones where it wasn't necessarily bad, wasn't necessarily great. It filled in a lot of gaps ready for the Royal Rumble, that in storyline and then obviously their push through to NXT Vengeance, which is their next pay-per-view. Pay-per-view PLE. So yeah, I feel we both jumped in at a weird time, and we're having to try and learn a lot of backstory to where we came into it, and now we're slowly pushing through into new storylines. Hopefully I will get a little bit more into it, especially if we consider some of the later matches in the card without giving too much away. But the Trick Williams Wes Lee match, I've been looking forward to that one because of the follow-up from last week's NXT. But then there were some matches that I was a little bit like, not really sure I want to watch that one. But I think it all depends as wrestling fans. We've all got people we enjoy watching and all got people we don't. So it makes that one a bit interesting. I must admit, I was looking forward to the next aspect of, the next segment, so to speak, of this week's NXT. But before we jump onto that, we had a couple of interesting bits. Well, I'll say two more points that I'd kind of want to throw to this one. Apart from, the fact that they let Bayley finish it, which I think they could probably have used. They were going to lose out either way on who got the win and how they did it, because none of these four women, maybe Cora Jade at most, needs a push. Bayley is very much over. Julie is the current NXT Women's Champion, so she doesn't need anything. Roxanne Perez is the former NXT Champion, so she's already had a big push and she's working off the benefits of that. But yeah, Cora Jade was the only one that could have benefited from a win if they'd have got the win.
Yeah, and I think as we get further on through, I think the reason behind the creative decisions on the match will probably become clearer.
I'm hoping so.
But yeah, we had Bayley stick the pinfall win on Jade after a huge flying elbow, which sort of closed that match out. But in my view, solid match. Can't really fault it. A great way to
open up a great card. I've got from there that we went into an Eddie Thorpe VT.
Yeah.
After.
So this gave actually me a chance to understand a little bit more about Eddie Thorpe as a character, because up to this point he's just the guy that's been going after the NXT rather unsuccessfully.
So I didn't actually realise some of the stuff in this VT was a thing. So I learned a little bit from this, especially with Eddie Thorpe. I did not know he had a Native American history. So that was quite a big bit of knowledge for me to pick up and kind of go, well, that's kind of cool, because that then incorporates into what we were saying on Monday Night Raw's episode about, so many different elements of wrestling from, from Japan, from Mexico, and stuff like this. And now we're getting more kind of plays from other aspects of American wrestling. So it's quite an interesting one. I think he's the only Native American superstar in professional wrestling at the moment. I don't think AEW have got anyone that clicks in there at the moment. I don't think TNA have got anyone either. So
I think possibly big promotion, sort of promotion. I think all of quite a wide net.
In the bigger promotions there's so many people that class themselves as pro wrestlers now, even if they're only maybe semi-amateur.
Yeah, this is it. So I actually went away and did a little bit of research, because with Native Americans, they obviously come from tribes, things like that, and I actually found out Eddie Thorpe is from and I'm probably going to really butcher this, so any Native American who listen, sincerely apologise, but from the Northern Paiute tribe.
I mean,
really butchered that.
I don't think you've butchered it as badly as you thought you have. It's not one that I've heard of. I did do some history subjects on the American West when I was younger. It's not one I've heard of, but there's so many. And it's not a country that we're from, so it's not a history that we know.
No, this is it. But we went from that VT into an in-ring promo, I believe.
It wasn't really an in-ring promo as such. It was more of an episode of the Grayson Waller effect, with Grayson Waller and Austin Theory interviewing Obafemi. I say interviewing very lightly. It was pretty much just Austin Theory ripping the living balls off the guy.
Well, in fairness, I would argue Austin Theory didn't really say an awful. He didn't say a massive amount. It was more Grayson Waller running his mouth.
Have I got the two confused?
I think you might have done.
So Austin Theory wasn't the guy that was sat on the desk at the end. The guy from Atlanta, where the other guy's Australian.
Yeah, so Grayson Waller was the one sat down behind.
Yeah, and Austin Theory was sat on the corner.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, either or, they kind of, both of them had a little bit of a cheap shot at Obafemi. And you can see through the entire segment that he's kind of like, who the fuck do you think you are? Like, the NXT champion here, are you not going to have a little bit of respect for me?
Well, it actually sort of lends itself how he decided to tackle the pair of them.
I mean,
on a verbal aspect. I mean, he didn't go after them personally on a physical level or anything like that. He went after them purely professional level.
Yeah.
Now, it's important to realise that all three of these wrestlers in the ring have or are still have an NXT career where they have competed within NXT
recently.
And yeah, I mean, Femi obviously current. Austin Theory and Grayson Waller were being called up to the main roster. They were they had their own separate NXT run. So I had to go away and research just to sort of get to understand what the next sort of comment was about, because Obafemi has said that in the 2 years that he's been in NXT, that he had a record-breaking run as the North American champion, which sort of started in on the 9th of January.
Yeah, he had that for 272 days, the North American Championship. That is a long run, considering NXT don't normally let their titles hold that long.
Now, to put this into perspective, the current NXT champion has only held the title roughly about 15.
Yeah, so the current North American champion in NXT at the moment is Tony D'Angelo, from the D'Angelo family. I'm just going to recap, Adam, because you broke up a little bit there, so I think it might be a bit easier for me to do that for you. He's currently 115 days into his reign, and we've seen a fair chunk of him even since New Year's Eve, when we started this podcast with the first NXT episode. So he's still got a long way to go to be able to catch up with Obafemi. Well, basically over double the amount of time. And you got to think about it. Obafemi's already he's already kicking on with the next title and already defending that, so he's completely forgotten about the North American Championship.
Yeah, that's you certainly, and I mean, what a championship run he's.
And he has, and it's been, we find out a little bit later on in the episode that championship run is going to run, even further. But he's got a difficult next match with it. So this segment basically, finished with A-Town Down Under. Basically, they really underestimated Obafemi, and he's got to a point where he's fed up of listening to these two boys kind of mouthing at him and having a cheap shot without really allowing him the time to speak. So he does what we'd love to see champions do, and basically says, look, if you boys think you're good enough, come and get it. I've got a big bit of gold here, and I'm willing to I'll take one of you on in 2 weeks' time. Whichever one it is, work it out between the two of you.
So before this happened, we had a bit of a segment. He had a bit of a pop as professional. Still cutting out, aren't I?
Yeah, I think we need to turn your gain up a little bit or drop your gain down a little bit.
I've switched mic to try and stop this.
Okay.
This is the problem, is I'm not.
Oh, right. So for the main event of this week's NXT, we've got Bianca Belair and Naomi versus Lash Legend and Jakara Jackson representing Meta 4 for the Women's Tag Team Championship.
Yeah, and an interesting one for two main roster superstars to make not just an appearance in NXT, but a offering up a main roster title match to somebody to a team in NXT as well. So this is breaking new ground for WWE, as far as I'm aware, at least.
Yeah, it's not really something I can remember them doing in the past. So it's definitely.
Speaking of breaking new ground, I actually think this may have been Naomi's first time in NXT as well. So there may have been plenty of cherries popped in this for this particular match.
Well, yeah, definitely, because we all know that Bianca Belair had a fantastic NXT career, where Naomi was one of those that jumped in at the right time, where NXT wasn't a televised thing, so she went from their training performance center straight to main roster.
Well, she made her debut on the main roster, if I remember correctly, as a Funkadactyl.
I mean, more than likely, that's a little bit out of my wheelhouse. I think I didn't follow the early amounts of women's wrestling hugely closely.
Oh, she was a support wrestler, and I forget his name, but I can remember his theme tune because it sticks in my head more than once.
Brodus Clay was
the one.
Yeah, and the other Funkadactyl was Cameron.
Yes, she was released a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, we digress. So the other important thing to mention is that Tag Team Champs actually competed 24 hours before this match aired. So they were competing on Raw on Monday night, and then competing again on NXT on Tuesday.
Yes, that is true. They ended up going against Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez. You can find that match covered in our previous podcast episode.
Yes, most definitely. But yeah, there was definitely a differing power dynamic in this match. I mean, part of it is that uh, we're used to seeing a superstar like Bianca Belair, who prides herself on being quite a strong competitor week in, week out. But it's unusual to see her go toe to toe with somebody who can sort of equal her power. Somebody like Lash Legend, who was quite honestly throwing Belair around at one point like a rag doll.
Which is not something you see a lot of hugely, unless you end up seeing it with against the people like sort of Nia Jax. But even then, she holds her own against some of the bigger superstars as it is. Considering she's one of the smaller in height superstars as well.
Fair enough. Didn't particularly look that far into it, but one of the next things that I was going to point out that, I mean, Meta Girls in general were just looking very dominant over what are now some pretty seasoned tag team champions, and I mean, Lash Legend managed to hit quite an impressive handspring moonsault at one point, which I didn't actually think she'd ever attempt, let alone pull off, but did really well with it in the process.
Yeah, and I think sometimes a lot of these guys and girls, to be fair, when you see them hit moves like that, you just because you don't see them hit them week in, week out, doesn't mean they can't necessarily do it. But they save some of those nicer ones for special occasions. And what more is a special occasion is the a main roster title being challenged for on NXT as a main event of all places.
And this is true, but considering it was it was the main event and it was a big title match, the one thing that surprised me that WWE did is partway through this match, they did like it was only about 30 seconds, but it was 30 seconds too much in my opinion. They did like a little mini mid-match promo between Ava, the NXT GM, and Cora Jade, where basically Jade was upset about everything that had happened with Roxanne Perez earlier in the evening, basically demanding to talk with Ava, the GM, who'd already had an action-packed evening with everything to do with uh, Roxanne Perez and all of that lot, as well as the Trick Williams incidents earlier in the evening. But it was just enough to sort of take me completely out of take me almost completely out of the match and sort of spoilt it for me a little bit, because if they were going to do something like that, then surely they could have found time to do that before the match started, or even had it as a closing promo as opposed to interrupting the main event as well as a women's world tag team championship match to just say, oh yeah, Cora wants a chat. Pretty sure that could have waited until after the match or preceded the match starting even. It just seems
seems a little bit disrespectful, doesn't it?
That's how I felt about it, but maybe I'm just being a bit I don't know. Just feel it just doesn't feel like it does the performers in ring any good to have their TV time interrupted. I mean, if you're going to do it during one of the undercard matches, then yes, fair enough. Makes complete sense. But you don't do it during your main event. No, not at all.
I've seen a few times where you'll be like halfway through a match and they'll take an ad break, and you're like, what was the point in that? And it's completely like pulled you out, whether it be like for an actual televised ad break or for, like I said, like when they spoke to Cora Jade. It does completely kill the vibe, and it's happening more often.
So ad breaks I can sort of understand, especially with the likes of NXT and SmackDown, because they are still being broadcast on cable TV in the US. NXT on the CW and SmackDown, I think on. I think it's on US. I think it's on USA. I'm not 100% certain on what SmackDown airs on in the US, but they have cable TV affiliates that broadcast within the United States. It makes sense for them to go to ad breaks because they have to do it on TV. They can't then continue playing footage. They still continue to play footage. It's just it's just the commentary normally that's interrupted. But yeah, I mean, that just sort of took me out of it. The ad breaks I can forgive because I understand that they've got to be able to appease the networks and things like that, which when they move fully over to Netflix, which I imagine is the case, it will be the case at some stage, then we may well see that recede either completely or next to never having a sort of ad break or at least giving the commentary team some kind of quick minute to sort of gather themselves, because it's a long time to keep talking realistically about a match without sort of continually repeating yourself over and over again. But going back to the match, we've got really regular momentum shifts within the match. It remained from beginning to end a really competitive match, which, to be quite honest, was almost too close to call in some cases. It was just it was. The Meta Girls really did put up a very good fight for those tag team champions and would have vastly deserved it had they won. However, Belair and Naomi retain after Jakara Jackson gets a bit desperate and tries what I've always referred to as a dirty pin. I believe she got a handful of tights trying to gain that extra bit of leverage towards the end of that match, and it backfired on her completely, which was such a shame to a degree, because it would have been nice to see those titles go to someone in NXT, but at the same time, it's a dishonest way to win. So
Eddie Guerrero wouldn't have cared. He used to lie, cheat, and steal.
This is true. But that essentially is the last match on the card for NXT. There was nothing after that, no promos, anything of that nature.
It finished with the end of that match, really, didn't it?
It really did. So yeah, we fade to black on yet another episode of Finishers and Factions, and we hope that you'll join us again when our episode drops for SmackDown. So we look forward to seeing you then.
See you soon. Peace.